Welcome, guys, for another episode of Brewing e-commerce, and I'm very excited to have Linda with me today. A lot of my guests that I bring on, I do get impressed by what they do and what they write, etc. But Linda's profile kind of really stood out. A lot of people who I follow, they also follow Linda and kind of listen to her. So that's how I kind of got introduced to her. And you have to follow her on LinkedIn because she writes amazing stuff about a lot that we're going to talk about today. So, welcome, Linda.
Thank you very much for having me.
Great. Linda, so you have a decade plus experience of e-commerce, which spread across different roles and different profiles, and doing a lot of good work that people from the community and me can absolutely learn from. So I'm going to try to get a lot of things from this today. Let's kickstart, Linda. I just wanted to understand firstly about how did you land yourself in e-commerce and your professional journey till now, please.
Okay, well, my first e-commerce taste of e-commerce was when I was working for, I used to be an SEO and a PPC manager and a UX consultant for a local design agency. And we had a client that had, they were building on Drupal. So we had an e-commerce client that kind of I got assigned to. And it ended up being a very involved process. This CEO was he wanted to be very involved with the project. And I ended up working very deeply with him. And I really liked the use cases of e-commerce, particularly because that was like the first e-commerce
Mhm.
project I worked on. And at the same time, I was just getting starting to write and contribute articles to different newsletters. So back in that day, like 2006, 2007 time, there used to be a lot of like SEO newsletters. And my big goal was to get published there. So I did start on the side, just blogging. And I started my own little like social media for business blog right when Twitter was just becoming a thing. And, before Facebook
Wow.
even was really popular. Like no businesses had a handle on these platforms and stuff. So I started blogging about that personally. And that opened the door to actually become a full-time blogger with an e-commerce company called Elastic Path here in Vancouver. So I got approached to, do some guest posting and that turned into a full-time role for 8 years. I ran a blog called the Get Elastic E-commerce blog. And in that role, it was just all e-commerce all the time. My job was to like go and look at all the internet retailer top 100 sites and then decide what to write about. They gave me like complete carte blanche to pick topics and shape it in that way. So the kind of genre that I landed on was the good idea, bad idea kind of topical stuff. So you'd pick an
Hmm.
area like cross-selling in the checkout or rotating banners, what's good about them, what's terrible about them, and here are live examples from websites. So in that process of writing that, I was visiting hundreds of websites all the time and clipping screenshots and everything, that to the point where at the end of that run after 8 years, when I left Elastic Path, went out to start a consulting company and I wanted to keep blogging. So I wanted to do kind of like an end-to-end project that was um, that was kind of taking all of those random topics and putting it in order. So you would have it was called E-commerce Illustrated, and it was kind of riff off of like the magazine Sports Illustrated. So 52 issues. The plan was to split it to 52 topics, one a week for an entire year. And it took me a lot of time
Hmm.
to write that content, but I went through and I
I can
started
only imagine.
end to
Yeah.
end, every single little detail, screenshotting it, cataloging it, and turning it into a blog, which no longer exists, by the way. That's another story. But in that process, I ended up building this kind of repository of screenshots, all kind of organized on my machine. And I thought this would be like a really cool thing to open source one day, to be able to like just take all the work that I've done and kind of make it generally available, because product managers and conversion optimizers and, anybody who just wants to look at their own website and go, what else can we do with it? People were already using the blog that way and using the search function for
Hmm.
that, reaching out to me and saying, hey, do you have any articles on this or that? So I wanted to do that. But that was like 6, 7 years ago, had that idea. I ended up going back into the
Okay.
corporate world, working for more tech companies and then more tech companies and more tech companies. And, this time last year, I was like, you know what? At that time, that e-commerce illustrated site, I will share just quickly what happened. I ended up losing the domain by accident because I wanted to take it down. I was starting
Oh,
to move the articles over to LinkedIn, and I went and I was on the live chat
oh
with the
my
host, and I'm
god.
like, I want to keep the domain name, but like, let's end the hosting because it was costing me like, I don't know,
Yeah.
several $100s a
Yeah.
year, and the content was getting old and all this
Oh
kind of stuff.
god.
So I ended up losing the domain. And then somebody bought that domain and started redirecting it to like not safe for work sites.
Wow.
People were starting to tell me like, okay, like your website that you're like linking to and all your bios everywhere is like, do you know where it's going? I'm like, oh my goodness. So I
Oh my
lost the
god.
domain
That's
and I
serious.
ended up
Yeah.
buying it back recently for like $1,000. But yeah, so anyways, long story short, I kind of want to go back and put that all together again in a more refreshed way and in a new format. So that's kind of where I've landed now is I'm in the process, like as of where we're recording now, of like relaunching that under ecom.ideas.com. So it's going to be like a full-on searchable database of all the little details and ideas that you can use in your e-commerce site so you can use it in your planning for like your product roadmap or conversion optimization, that kind of thing.
And that looks super impressive because when I look at your posts, they're very detailed. They always come with statistics. 14% do this and 28% do this and this. So you're very laser focused on trying to pick a very small use case or a problem, and then you kind of go in depth to explain that. I couldn't be more excited to see how this culminates into the whole thing that you're building, because coming from a CRO background, there are just a million things that you can bring on board to kind deliver value. That's something that you're building now, and that should be pretty exciting. And I saw that you aim to launch it officially in 2024 now. So all the best on that side. Um, and I want to pick a lot on different topics and different things that you kind of explained right now. So in your journey, Linda, I think working with different brands and looking at different websites to see what is nice, what is not. Uh, I think your niche also came a lot around CRO, right? Right. And one of the first questions I want to ask, because you have a very different lens of CRO, is: do you think brands still give enough importance to CRO today, or still it's majorly all about acquisition and just bringing traffic?
I think, well, there's been a massive shift since back in the day when I used to write about CRO with Get Elastic, because that was right when Google Website Optimizer was still called, I think it was called Google Website Optimizer before they called it Google Optimizer, whatever they just ended up calling it. I've already
Yeah.
forgotten since it's sunset, right? But yeah,
Yes,
those
indeed.
were just hitting the market, and there were very few companies that you'd have to hire, one of the very few consultants that were doing these, like Brian Eisenberg or Wider Funnel, or there was a few, core consultancies that were getting their hands dirty on these tools, but it wasn't as big as it is today. Like, I'm really happy to see that there's a lot of people now, a lot of, young people in their career have chosen CRO as their career,
Yeah.
and they're finding roles in-house at the actual companies to be their in-house
Yeah.
conversion. And a lot of UX designers, UI designers, and stuff also have that CRO hat on. So it's really nice to see. I think
Indeed.
it's better than ever. And I do think that companies really do prioritize that and pay attention to it. And I credit that to
Mhm.
like the social media and the long time of people like getting excited about going to like a conversion conference or conversion topics being held at marketing and e-commerce conferences and stuff like that. So, and all the books that have
Yeah.
been written about it. So yeah, it's really cool because I feel like it's almost, dare I say, getting as big as SEO.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
getting close.
Yeah. It is getting close. Let me ask you this, and I've seen some of your stuff around this topic. There's this huge influx of AI that everybody's talking about, right? And I think AI is already impacting e-commerce in a big way. But I want to even narrow it down further to understand, given the complexity of a million things happening together is what results into CRO. How would you say the trends in AI that are going to, impact positively on CRO, or how is AI really going to help with CRO kind of things in the coming future?
Yeah, well, I think that AI is being built natively into a lot of the point solutions that people add to their websites. So, I mean, a perfect example of this is a merchandising tool like a search and merchandising, machine learning ranking with AI capabilities in there. Those things to run as individual A/B tests are kind of like they're really big at scale. It's better to let the machine learning do it, right? Same with
Yeah,
ad optimization and a lot of that stuff. So I think that in that
yeah,
case, AI really is doing heavy lifting, and often there's A/B testing capabilities within that kind of a tool where you could say like, okay, let's test this ranking logic against that, and let's just let the tool kind of figure it out. Um, and then in the conversion testing tools themselves, AI is obviously going to become part of the feature set to be able to, make better multiple variant testing that kind of generates itself. The tools will be able
mhm,
to, because Google Ads is a great model to look at, right? Now it's
yeah,
writing the
yeah,
headlines for you, and it's kind of like you just give it a few keywords and then it kind of generates its own thing, which I think some people, including myself, kind of feel a little bit uneasy about because we used to like being the creatives and having
yeah,
full control of that, and now you're kind of it's a little bit more opaque what they're doing. But I do think that that will filter its way into different experiences on the website, like auto generated banners too, right? Like now where there's generative AI, imagine if you could kind of through a little bit of digital body language kind of determine who your visitor is, and then maybe
yeah,
reshoot all of the, if it's apparel, reshoot all of the models as a different skin tone or a different body type
yeah,
or a different anything like that. So I think we in
sure.
the next 5 years might see that happen.
Yeah, yeah. Funny that you mentioned that. We also did a lot of experiments in creative generation based on generative AI, right? And we realized that it was very binary. Some of the brands kind of liked it, and they said this is cool. Some of them detested it, uh, because they're just, like, oh, AI is still not that advanced kind of a thing. But I know what you mean is, uh, while the models evolve, when you get deeper into different things, right? I think we are just at the tip of the iceberg, at least from the creative generation side of things. From the data journey, segmentation, A/B testing, I think AI is more deeply embedded than we realize it, and I think it's starting to deliver a lot of value. Yeah, yeah. So, let's go back to your CRO, and the current status of most of the brands, and the merchants where we look at. What, in your opinion, what would be the top five CRO mistakes that most of the brands do?
Oh, wow. Well, there's a lot of diversity in brands, right?
And it doesn't have to be like, yeah, yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Just on top of your head, Linda. So yeah, yeah,
Yeah. The reason why I kind of say it that way is that like you've got big brands like Amazon, Walmart, really high traffic site
sure,
with large teams, and they'll have experimentation within smaller divisions, right? So you'll have
yeah,
somebody working on like they almost like productize or even have a special category manager for this type of product type, and then they have some kind of
right,
wiggle room in evolving the product and doing banners a different way or doing their list design a different way.
yeah,
So I think that I just want to make the distinction between like, a small and scrappy D2C brand, which has a very,
yeah,
they have a lot more flexibility in terms of how they have a lot more compared to like a retailer that's reselling a lot of brands that kind of takes from the manufacturer, plugs it in, and that's the website. D2C brands
right,
have more on them to have a nice PDP that has video and really tells the value props. And I'm seeing more of these like comparison tables against competitors and stuff. Like the D2C
yeah, yeah,
websites are evolving their own flavor and that kind of thing. So I would say in two parts. So You want five, so I'll bullet them out. Number one, I think is
Whatever you think is fair. Yeah.
Number one, I think is, like it's an art and a science. So it's very difficult because when you're looking at the CRO, there is always, as data driven as you want to be, there is a heuristic, right? You kind of, somebody has to look at the website and start forming the hypothesis, and that comes out of a human. So I think the number one mistake
Mm.
is not actually going through a process of getting everything on the board and then prioritizing in terms of what's likely to move the needle. And that's difficult because who are the stakeholders in that? Is it the CRO, the person that leads CRO? Is it the development team? Because
Mm.
every idea also has a potential cost or, technical debt that prevents it from being done, and then people's
Yeah.
opinion on things. So I think it's difficult. Maybe it's not a mistake, but it's a difficulty that organizations need to overcome is just, what do we test first and
Fair.
why? What? Because the bigger impact thing might need a brand new component to be developed. And then now that's a different conversation. And a lot of teams don't have in-house development. So
True. True.
it's complicated. Number two, I think is the whole methodology on like the statistics, right? A lot of marketers are the creative types and they don't have the background in the statistics. And I'd say myself included, right? My eyes kind of gloss over on the
Yeah.
hard math. So,
Yeah.
like being able to have like a really rigorous and disciplined approach to analyzing a test, which you can sometimes get a test where you get the hard numbers back, but there's more nuances, there's more qualitative factors behind it that the raw numbers aren't telling you. So I'm not saying
Yeah.
it's a mistake, I'm saying it's kind of a challenge.
Mm.
um,
Mm.
number three number three, I think, is this trust, overly trust in the data. So if you want to be a data driven company, we're a data driven company. Now it becomes, if the data says this, that is the law. When
Yeah.
again, can be more nuances and stuff. Every A B
Mm.
test that you do, there's a whole universe of stuff that could have been the variable that you tested, or could have been the way that you styled it or designed it, or could have been when you launched it, or how long you ran it,
Mm.
or anything. So sometimes if you say we ran that test and the result was this and that, we're done, that's the answer.
Yeah.
You sometimes,
Yeah.
like, that's why people do AA testing, the exact same things against each other, and you'll see maybe one got a lift and one didn't.
Yeah.
Um, so
Fair.
I think that
Yeah.
can kind of be a blind spot, right? Is that like you've done a test or you've gotten data, and then the data is the single source of truth. Number four, because I'm thinking of these on the fly. Give me a minute.
Which is awesome. Trust me. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's also the segmentation, right? It can be very difficult because if you want to get, there's so much talk about personalization and targeting, and personalization is a buzzword that gets out there, but it's hard to personalize and run A/B tests because A/B tests are on the aggregate, they're on the whole. You can sometimes isolate it down to a product page or a type of, only one type of traffic source is including in this experiment, and
Yeah.
that also limits your data set. It could make the test run longer than it should. It can, give you inconclusive results because you didn't have enough in the sample size. So those are
Mm.
difficulties. And number five, just to round it out, because we're so fresh off of Google optimizing sunsetting, just the cost. I think a lot
Yeah.
of
Yeah.
really great companies are going to have to sacrifice or change their methodology of testing. So if you now don't
Yeah.
have a budget to pay the $3,000 or whatever it is per month, plus your talent that you're paying to run these tests, you might have to move to something like serial testing, where you launch the first thing and then you take it and then launch the second thing and do the
Wait for it. And
there's
yeah.
difficulties with that. So yeah, those, I think there's more that we could rattle off, but those are five.
No, I'm sure. I'm sure they're more. But you summarized them very nicely, and I think they're very differently put than a lot of other conversations that I've had in this. So I'm glad that I asked this, because it puts a very different perspective, right? But I'm going to pick on one of them to go a little further, which is again very personal to me, is personalization. Right? So I'm going to ask you a couple of questions and tell me if you agree or disagree. Right? So there's a very common statement in the ecom industry which says that 97% of the visitors coming to your store are not ready to buy. Do you agree or you disagree?
Oh, can I use the default consulting answer, which is it depends?
It depends.
I think traffic source is huge, right? Like if
But
you're getting
yeah,
all traffic, but then some are coming through, your email program, then hopefully they're coming with at least a little bit higher intent than if
sure.
they don't know why they're there and they came through a Google ad or something.
Okay,
Yeah, I mean, where people are, if you're top of funnel, middle funnel, bottom funnel, raving fan, or disinterested, it's so hard. I think personalization tries to suss that out early um, through the actions that people take on the site or other cues. But yeah, if you go purely by conversion rate, an average conversion rate being about 3% if on a good day, then yes, 97% didn't want to buy, but some of them will come back later. So maybe
sure.
your real conversion
Some of
rate,
them
if
will come back later.
you're 2 weeks later, is higher than that. So I guess it depends how you define it as well. But there are definitely some
Sure.
sites that are getting
Uh,
like 8%, 10% conversion rate.
yeah. Okay. Okay. That's perfect. Now, a leading on to that is more than 80% of your traffic on an e-commerce site is usually first-time visitors. How do you personalize to them?
Well, some of them might be returning and because of the cookie policies
Sure.
and
Some of
price
them, which is
switch.
yeah,
You think that they're brand new, but they're actually maybe your best performing.
fair.
Yeah,
Fair. But let's say if it's 70%, let's say it's 50% or
yeah,
whatever, like a major proportion. And
yeah.
yeah, well, how do you personalize for them? Because you ought to do something for them as well.
Well, if the homepage isn't capturing all of those new entrants, right? You might have a very long tail of other pages, but let's assume everybody starts their journey at your homepage. If it's on mobile, you probably have your menu collapse behind a hamburger. And so now you're depending on
Hmm.
that small amount of screen real estate. So oftentimes retailers will put a banner, right? They'll choose a banner, and that's chosen by their
Sure.
merchandising team or maybe even the brand team or whatever. It's done by like spinning a wheel, or the conversion optimizer,
Yeah.
forms a hypothesis of this is what's going to work. So I mean, you can definitely use those prime pixels to throw up a bunch of main categories to give them something to click without having to go into your menu, and that will give you a signal, based on what, like if you put the men's, women's, children's, and pets, your four departments up there, and they click on something, now you've got a signal. So many times,
Okay.
like whatever they click on next in your offer, if you do it strategically, whatever above the fold should be able to help people self segment in there. If
Hmm.
you
Hmm.
have the personalization tool or the strategy, the logic, the targeted selling strategies lined up in your back
Hmm.
end, then you can maintain that scent throughout the
Sure.
site. I think some websites I see kind of overcorrect that a little bit. I'm not going to say the brand, but there's a apparel brand where once you click on the men's or women's, even if you return back there, like now the whole site is either men's or women's, and it's very hard to like undo.
Everything in men's. Yeah.
So I don't think that's kind of a mistake. But yeah, I think really that's, you
Yeah.
should be thinking about it mobile first and trying to use that real estate to
Fair.
like strategically.
Fair. Oh, that's really nice. Having those early cues and events that you can track, and then you go ahead and lead them on to very dedicated sections.
Yeah.
Is something is so obvious for most brands to be doing, but it's so rare to find. Um, Still, because I yeah, for me, I think data driven is all about having a strategy and the mindset and then implement that in every possible place, right? Which is not kind of, I've seen very common. People like, oh, this platform let me do this and let me do this thing only kind of a thing. So yeah,
Yeah. And
yeah,
there can be some
right.
inertia and fear to change things too, right? Because if you don't know, if you don't have the data of like changing the whole homepage strategy is going to work or not, there can be internal pushback or some fear or some, like,
Yeah,
especially if you're in a larger company where there's different, category managers for other things that might have their own P&L tied to their own performance. And now there's competition on who gets featured on the homepage.
Yeah, those kind of things are, very different ball game altogether. And again, I believe a lot of data can kind of help with putting the dynamic content there, based on sales, listings, and popularity and all that stuff. And then again, based on the profiling in real time of the intent as well. So yeah, okay, cool. No, that's pretty nice. Um, when we run experiments, right? I think one of the biggest mistakes that I have seen a lot of brands do is, firstly, don't run this for enough time, and second, uh, the comparison factors are so varied that it becomes very difficult to compare an apple to apple. It's always like an apple to orange, and then the results and the data go very, very haywire, right? So, from an experimentation hat here, Linda, any advice for brands, or how should they pan out their strategy, and what are the kind of things that they should imbibe when they're kind of trying to implement some experimentations on their side?
Yeah, I think the biggest disappointing thing about A/B testing is how many, no leader founds you can end up with, because there's different approaches to A/B testing. The more granular you get to do an experiment, the less likely you're to move the needle, right? Like it's more the radical redesigns or launching a new feature or changing something significantly that is likely to have an impact. So a lot of times, you want to get, especially if you don't have a huge development support behind you, you're testing like little UI
Yeah,
tweaks or this versus that. So that can get a little discouraging when you've got a dashboard full of running experiments with no leaders found. And then you let them run longer to see if maybe, or they start off, here's another thing, they start off hot and then just like a boiling pot, they just start
yeah.
cooling down and you're like,
This
oh,
is,
we had a winner, which can make it tempting to call a test early because you see that kind of
yeah,
effect happening and then now we launch another test. Oh, it's hot, and oh, there's a difference, and we proved our hypothesis, let's stop it now, or let's implement the
yeah,
one that we like, whether there was no leader found or not. So there's a lot of commentary online which I agree with, where it's like, what, a learning is a learning, right? Regardless of, if you learned that it had no effect,
yeah.
that's fine. That's actually great. That should give you more confidence. And if you're struggling to find a winner, that might indicate that your site's pretty good, right? It's hard to
Oh,
optimize for.
wow. Yeah.
I mean, it's all about how you frame
Yeah.
it.
Okay.
So, I mean, if you find that you're getting, test after test after test with kind of like flat results, one way is to just get a little bit more radical, right? Just start testing a little bit more bolder things, and that might mean development. But yeah, there's always a challenge with letting a test run too long too. Too
Hmm.
short, too long. It's like the Goldilocks. You have to get it just right.
Amazing. Yeah, I couldn't think of that. Maybe you don't need all these things, and maybe the site is pretty good as well. That's also an inference, and I completely agree with you that maybe, sometimes we always, like, sometimes we have that hypothesis in our head, and we're just looking at that early data validation just to prove ourselves correct, and then like, hey, this works, and then we stop it just because we know whatever. um, and I've also seen exactly the opposite, that irrespective of whatever data provides for, you still end up going for the other thing because it just, yeah, whatever, right?
Yeah. Yeah,
So
and
yeah,
bias is in there too, right? Sometimes you're rooting for
right,
one because it's the thing that you want to have, and maybe your company culture is
yeah,
such that you can't launch a feature without an A/B test. So,
yeah, yeah,
if you're doing
yeah,
that, like sometimes you might be consciously or unconsciously pulling for something and hoping that it wins, and maybe even like manipulating interpretation to get it going. But
true,
sometimes it's okay. Like I'm probably going to get skewered for this, but very unpopular opinion. But I think some things are okay to launch without an A/B test. If it's like, because you can A/B test
yeah,
everything
I'd
and it's
second you there.
negligible, but it is a nice to have because it's has a nice branding effect, or it makes it look prettier. Prettier things don't
Yeah,
necessarily convert. I think Craigslist is a
no,
is an
yeah,
example of
yeah,
that. There's lots of other examples. We've all seen the like square corners versus rounded corners and one wins. So, like there's all the little micro details matter, but that's on like really, really big sites with a lot of data. Like Google can
Yes,
afford to test
that's
its
definitely.
150 shades of blue and that kind of thing. So yeah, it's art and science.
I love it. I love the way you put it in there. It's art and science, and depending on the brand, depending on the stage, depending on what's your mindset, I think the proportion of this art and science will also differ for brands, right?
Hmm.
Because at the end of it, everything you do is making you learn something which either I should implement or I should not. Right.
Hmm.
So no, that's very nice. Oh, absolutely. This is amazing, Linda. So many different point of views that you've been able to bring in the conversation today. Really enjoyed that. Um, I have to do this part, which is the most difficult one, is asking you the toughest question of the podcast, which is that now you have to tell us something about yourself that you've never told anyone before.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yes, and
All
you
right.
thought the fun was only in experimentation.
It's
Yeah.
hard because I'm so loud about my idiosyncrasies. Like everybody, I think one of them that like my close friends would know, but maybe the internet would run and hide from is like I have this habit where I don't like to eat things that I've touched. So, I'll eat a chip and then the
Easy
part
to
that
touch.
I'm holding, I'll put down. So I'll end up with a plate full of like little nubs and I get some side eyes from that. But like people close to me know,
Okay.
know that that's just my little.
Okay. Yeah. And knowing you now a little bit, I would say that just part of your A/B testing, some part of it you like and some part you don't. So
Yeah,
okay, no, that's amazing.
I dropped this on one party and not at another, and I just measured the amount of times I was invited back, and it was statistically significant.
Indeed. Thank you so much, Linda. It was a very nice conversation. I really enjoyed,
Yeah,
and what I really hope is the new thing that you're starting in the next year, which is not too far away. All your experience and the learnings will nicely culminate into that, and I wish you all the best. And I'm sure it's going to be awesome.
I,
And because we've enjoyed this, yeah, looking forward to having you on the podcast again in the coming days.
right on. Appreciate it a lot.
Yeah.